welcome to The Law Matters. Of course it does. Hi, I'm Debbie Moraes, your host and moderator. This program created to educate, inform, and help you with the law matters because the law matters. Understand the law better, and you're in a better position to decide how to protect yourself, your family, and your business. We provide information and resources that'll help you decide whether or not you actually may be able to handle some issues yourself. If you do decide that you want to seek outside professional counsel, hopefully after watching these shows, you'll be better prepared, and so will the professional whom you select. Either way, you'll be saving time, money, and hopefully achieve better results. The Bazar and Associates law firm in East Providence continues to offer their expertise and information and insights on all of the topics that we tackle. And let's begin today by welcoming a special guest. We have with us today Tom Mirza.
Hi.
An East Providence-based lawyer, a cohort of David's, one who has 20 years of experience in civil litigation, domestic relations, and criminal defense. And, as always, welcome David Bazar. So today is a very special day as we tape this show, headlining the news, not just in Boston, in New England, and in many other states as well, is the news that it is official, marijuana is legal in Massachusetts. So our topic today is pot. There's still essentially a complex web of issues, so says law enforcement. We're going to explore some of those today. We thought it would be a good time for you to know what you need to know. Suppose you want to buy, sell, grow, use, whether it's for medication or recreation. There's still a major issue that we're going to have to grapple with, which is that the federal level still considers it to be illegal. Poses some interesting challenges, as does the fact Massachusetts is legal, Rhode Island is not. So we have so much to talk about. Let's begin with Tom. What's the law in Mass today, and how has life changed?
We don't know just yet. You can possess up to an ounce as an adult legally now in Massachusetts.
Legally is what, 18 or 21?
21, but there is some consideration now in the legislature to bump that to 25.
Okay.
Those regulations, they're still in the works. There are other issues related to it as to where you can use it. Public places, you can't. So again, Massachusetts has its work cut out for it over the next 6 to 12 months to clarify those things so that it's not a mess for individuals who want to utilize marijuana. What's
an ounce?
An ounce is 1/16 of a pound. It's, I don't know.
Is it one joint?
No. There's 454 grams in a pound, so 1/16 of that. And
there you go.
It's a lot of pot.
And as we talked about when we did the show on the ballot questions, there are the unintended consequences of the legalization of marijuana and some of those things that need to be sorted out. One of the things we talked about is driving under the influence, and how is that going to be dealt with, because as we talked about with alcohol, you can take a blood alcohol test and they can measure how much alcohol is in your system and deal with you accordingly. With marijuana, I think there's issues because it can stay in your system for a long time. It might not be affecting you at the time that you're pulled over, and how are they going to deal with that? And in Rhode Island, for example, we've had conversations about when you get pulled over and brought to the station and they give you your rights at the station, and now it's not an alcohol situation but a suspected drug situation, and they ask you to take the breathalyzer, and you take the breathalyzer and you sign the forms to take the breathalyzer. Now they ask you to take a blood test so they can measure for drugs in your system. And the court has held in some instances that they don't have to give you all your rights again because the right form somewhere on it says we might give you 2 tests. And I've had clients who have said to me, they asked me to take the breathalyzer. I took it. When they asked me to take the other test, I said, well, now I'd like to call an attorney because you're asking me to do something else and I want to know what my rights are. And they said, no, you had that chance already and you didn't. And I don't agree with that. I think that if you're going to ask someone to take a second step, that you really ought to afford them the rights that are afforded the first time you go through those rights.
So there's a breathalyzer for alcohol. I understand that they are trying to develop something that will let them determine whether or not you are unduly influenced. Is that on the market now, or is that just a research?
It's not on the market. market. There's information in the industry that there are a couple of groups who are close to developing it, but David makes a good point on how long cannabis stays in your system. You could have a positive test and it really has no current impact on your functioning because it happened 2 or 3 or 4 days ago. So it'll be interesting to see what does come out on the market. It's one of the biggest concerns that law enforcement has around the country with this effort to legalize. They just don't have the ability to have on-the-spot testing that allows them to substantiate their reasons for the stop and other concerns.
And so what happens, as has been typically noted to be the case, where you have so much harassment by police officers of indigent, minority, we know who you are, we're tracking you, we think we'll pull you over. There's not the blood alcohol now, there's just the sniff of marijuana. What happens now?
Well, I think the courts in Rhode Island have said that's not sufficient to conduct a search. There's an assumption that if there's the smell of marijuana in the car, it could be there for legal reasons.
So do you flash the card and then that puts an end to it?
Well, maybe, maybe not. I mean, that's another question. If somebody had it legitimately in the car, I mean, there's a strong odor to marijuana.
Yes.
So you could have a patient in the car an hour earlier, and that car will smell of marijuana when the police stops you. So those are things that are going to need to be flushed out also as this whole topic matures.
And what's your advice these days if you happen to be a person in Massachusetts and it's legal and you had less than an ounce or whatever?
Well, don't use it in public.
Don't use it at all. Never in the car.
No, I would, unless you're in your driveway.
In your driveway, your own property.
That's right. You also have your own personal obligations because, look, there's an impact. You wouldn't use it if you didn't get high from it. So should you be driving? The answer is no. And you have labeling issues which tell you shouldn't use marijuana and drive. And there's all sorts of decisions that you have to make with that, just like you would with alcohol.
I wouldn't use it in my car, even in my own driveway. And there's case law in Rhode Island for DUI cases where there's someone who's in their driveway or in a parked car somewhere, drunk, and they get charged with DUI even though the car's not even running.
Right.
And it's the ability to turn the car on and make it run that can subject you to that. So I'd say in the house.
Fair enough.
I would too.
Or in the backyard.
Until this matures, I think your best bet is if you want to use it at home, use it at a private residence, don't operate a vehicle with it, and enjoy it that way.
And still, if you have a medical card, carry that with you all the time.
And carry that with you all the time, because you're actually allowed more on your possession with a medical card.
And what happens, those of us who live in Rhode Island and are in Massachusetts, you can have it in Massachusetts, you cross the state line without even knowing it perhaps in some of the back roads. Now what happens if you happen to be stopped? What do you do? Oops.
Crossing state lines actually could constitute a federal offense. Remember, under federal law, it's still illegal. It's still a Schedule I substance, which needs to change. But Rhode Island and Massachusetts have reciprocity as far as medical patients. So technically, you can use your Rhode Island medical card at a Massachusetts dispensary and vice versa, which on its face makes sense. But then you're crossing state lines with a federally banned substance. The likelihood of it being a problem is slim and none, but it's still there. Yeah. And again, those things have to be addressed. And I think they will be rather soon, because more and more states are moving to a recreational model. More and more states now, I think it's close to 40 or so, have it as medical, and it has to be addressed.
At some point in time, the federal government has to catch up with what the majority of the states are doing. Right. It's not that different from when states were making the laws on marriage equality. And eventually the federal government recognized that and caught up with that. I think they're going to have to do that in this area too.
As I read about it or read about it recently, the federal government claims that their reason to keep it as an illegal substance, as is some of those other harsher drugs, is that the FDA has not been able to find it's in clinical trials, it hasn't passed muster yet, and so they are hesitating to give the blessing and lift that restriction on it. Sounds good, I guess, from their perspective. We're not here to challenge that. But the point that it does bring up is that they're clearly moving to have regulations, better labeling. What are the pros and cons legally of that? Or how does that play out?
Well, as it gets into the market, you need to know more about it. That's the problem I have with it remaining on Schedule 1. Schedule 1 prevents a lot of funding opportunities for universities and governments to do the research that's needed. You can't be hypocrites with that. If you're concerned about it as far as its impacts, then move it off of Schedule 1. That doesn't decriminalize it necessarily. It just opens up the door to a lot more money to have institutionalized investigations of its efficacy with a wide range of medical problems. Since I've been involved in this, probably about 18 months now, the information that I've accumulated regarding the medicinal benefits of cannabinoids is amazing. It's a shame that we can't bring that out into the open and allow it to be researched the way a lot of other medicines are, because there could be enormous benefit to it. This conversation can go two ways with people. You morally and ethically don't have a problem with marijuana, so all of these ideas and opportunities are a lot more easier for you to accept. Or you're of that school where, oh, it's a bad drug and it's a gateway drug and it's worse than alcohol, and you simply shut down on any ability to discuss the underlying medicinal potential values to it. And once you allow yourself to talk to people about that, you'll be amazed at the research that's currently going on now at major research institutions, including in New England right now. Its effects on a wide range of ailments is amazing.
And
Yes.
it really is two very different discussions in the sense that the federal government can move it off that Schedule 1. Alcohol, was banned at one time by the federal government. Move it off without saying, oh, we approve of it from a medicinal point of view yet until the FDA has a chance to do the research. There are two different issues. And sure, of course, the FDA, in terms of what value it has as a drug, should be able to research it and give its approval in the course like it does with any other medication. But it doesn't mean that it's appropriate to leave it as a criminal act because the FDA hasn't been able to approve it as a medicinal purpose.
Point well taken. Of course, even though it was Massachusetts that had question 4 on the docket and was passed, Rhode Island, of course, is being forced to consider some of this, and as it's impacting immediately on them. And of course, we're reading about how many dispensaries are open and how many more, and what they're going to pay if they have 5,000 square feet versus 2,500 square feet for the size of the dispensary. But clearly, there's more in the mainstream right now. It seems that they will be more likely to do research if you have enough currency, if you have enough use of it. And it certainly seems that what we've been reading, now most of us can find out very easily about the different strains, Kush versus something else, and what's good for MS versus if you have some nausea from chemotherapy. The fact that there are so many of these tests going on, it would seem that that is irreversible. Is that true? I mean, how could they possibly squash this at this point?
It's going to be difficult. You have 40-plus states, like I said, who have it for medicinal purposes now. I believe there are 9 states that have it recreationally, including California. So you have 45 or 50 million people who have access to it. I think it's early on in some states. Washington and Colorado have had it recreationally for the longest period of time. They still have not. They don't have enough history yet with it as to its impacts on youth usage, on crimes being committed, on all sorts of things that other governors around the state would like to know before they decide which way they're going to go with it from a recreational standpoint. Rhode Island's a little different because they're surrounded by Massachusetts. Massachusetts is now going to generate revenue from it, although Mass is slowing it down. My understanding is Connecticut is also moving quickly to consider whether to recreationalize marijuana, and those are all going to be considerations for the governor and the legislature here in the state as to what their next move is going to be.
How about the mere fact that Massachusetts legalizes it, it's now a taxable entity at the state level, and I guess even at some of the various locales, they can have an additional surcharge if they want.
Correct.
Why wouldn't Rhode Island and any other neighboring state want to capitalize on that and enhance their budget? Bottom line.
Well, there's a couple of reasons. When doing the research out of Colorado and the Department of Revenue, their tax revenue from this has not been as high as they thought.
Elaborate on that.
And the same in Washington State. And a lot of it, the money is going back into enforcement rather than into the secondary services that were supposedly going to get the benefit of those revenues. But you're 2 or 3 years into a new industry. And again, I think the governor of Colorado, who spoke about this on 60 Minutes last week, we're just learning now. It's only been 2 or 3 years. And we just have to take our time on both the financial benefits of it from a revenue standpoint and any other collateral potential problems with it.
How about from the legal standpoint where, as we talk about this being taxed and then surcharges, that means it's going to cost a little more. And for those people who knew a guy and kept it underground,
they're still going to know a guy who knows a guy.
And that's still going to continue, especially if that price escalates at the state-regulated level.
That's a very important consideration. One of the reasons why the governor, I believe, accelerated the cultivation license process was to try to get control on the growers.
In Rhode Island.
In Rhode Island. There were 2,500 or so caregivers who were supplying the compassion centers with unregulated marijuana, and in order to try to get a grasp around that, not just from a revenue standpoint, but from a quality standpoint. And if you look at the law, third-party testing is required, all sorts of different things to actually ensure that the product that's getting to the public is better. But you also have pricing issues. And you have 3 outlets in Rhode Island. The pricing is fairly controlled between those 3 outlets, and you still have a gray and black market that's going to thrive, continue to thrive, as long as you have people who can get it for less money through that access. And again, as time goes on, that will hopefully flush itself out and be better for the community.
It's not a whole lot different from the tax stamp on cigarettes back in the day, and people were trying to avoid paying that, and they were selling them illegally, and there were crackdowns on that, and appropriately so. They can do the same thing, or at least try to control it. Now it's more controlling it because of the revenue impact on the state, but there's a reason to do that. And Tom has already talked about the quality control issues. And so if it becomes more mainstream and more regulated by the state so that the quality control is there, that might also impact people's decision on where they're going to buy it. And, you know, you can still have criminal laws as to you buy it correctly, that's fine. But if you buy it illegally, it's still illegal.
I think one example that I had read was, since more people will be buying it now, if it's legal and it's accessible, you should likely ask your grower, what happened to the pesticides? What are you using in this, how it's being grown? And is there moisture so that there's mold or contaminants in it? And if that's being regulated, you'll have more insight, more information about how it's done and how it's grown, and you'll know more about what to ask. And to your point, David, might make you decide maybe you would pay a little more to make sure it was quality stuff.
Right.
Absolutely. The biggest growing segment in this market is 45-year-olds and up. And
Not the kids?
No, that consumer is more interested in the sourcing of the product itself. So it will be important to those consumers when they come back into the market if it becomes recreational.
So I don't know that you would know this, and I'm not asking you to be the researcher on this, but perhaps you have heard. Is that increase in that demographic because more are interested in knowing which strain of marijuana will relax my muscles versus give me a head high? Is that why that market of the 50 plus is growing?
That may be part of it. It's also a group of people who were exposed to it 20, 25 years ago.
Yes.
And now that they can get it in an edible form where they don't have the smoke and the carcinogens that are associated with joints, and you can get vape pens and other ways to try it, I think they're just more receptive to it. Where consumers below that age group have always had access to it, and regardless of what kind of shape it's in or form, they've been comfortable with it. So if you look at states that have legalized it, that's where the biggest growth is within those markets.
Imagine the commerce when they're talking about even the vaporization rather than the more conventional methods of pot, that actually might be a healthier way because it's taken the carcinogen factor out of the equation.
This isn't an industry that's in the dark anymore. You have national publications that treat marijuana like commodities, like oil and wheat, and you can go right online. And they track the pricing in the different states and the impacts, and they probably do. It's amazing the amount of information on the market scope of it and on the research side of it. It's all out there. You just take a look and read it, and it's good to know.
Let's talk about the whether it's legal or not. There's certainly much interest in decriminalizing marijuana, because even if it's legal, there's still saying there's a prohibition on it for all the reasons that we had talked about. What is the fallout when you are still saying it's been decriminalized? So I guess that means you're not going to prison for 5 years, but you still could be detained and go to the police station and have to fill out forms, and someone has your name, and then you can't serve on the PTA. What is the fallout? What's the real issue about the decriminalization not being enough, actually?
Who knows? It all depends on each jurisdiction and how, not only the state, but even on a local level, how they deal with those stops. It's really tied into the quantities you have on you. It depends on the police officer at the time. I mean, it's a civil infraction now if you have more than an ounce in Rhode Island. Look, employers have a whole different panoply of issues they have to deal with. Even in Colorado, you can be banned from having it in your system for certain jobs. So it's in the area and topic that just we have to wait and see how it develops.
It's one of those things we talked about, the unintended consequences or issues that aren't thought of as you go through this. And it's an interesting to view the difference between Massachusetts legalized, Rhode Island decriminalized. But as Tom said, it's also issues that get raised for the employer, and what are they allowed to regulate. An employer can say there's no smoking of cigarettes in the workplace, so can they say there's no use of marijuana in the workplace? There's no drinking in the workplace. So one would probably presume, even in Massachusetts where it's legal, the use of it at the workplace can be regulated.
Right. Even where it's through a doctor and a prescription. You have suits in Colorado now that are pending with users of marijuana under a medical authorization card, but the employer says it doesn't matter. You're using heavy equipment, it's a danger, it has an impact, and people have been fired as a result of it. So the legal system and the courts also have to address that.
And to go into yet another contentious area, the issue about firearms. So if you have been a convicted felon, no, you won't get past that background check. As I read too, though, if you've had enough instances of being stopped, processed, or whatever they want to call it, even if you've not been sent to prison for marijuana, you could be denied a permit for a firearm just because of aggravated or too extensive use that might make you a less than bona fide person to carry a gun. Would you like to comment on that?
No.
I knew the answer to that.
Yeah. No, I'm not a big gun proponent, and
but it's going to be an issue.
It's going to have an impact across the board. There are different strains of marijuana too. CBDs don't have the brain effects that the THC molecule has. CBDs are effective in certain types of treatments. THC has a different effect on other types of treatment. There's research in both areas as to what is more effective. Some of the things they're finding out with the research is your brain has receptors already built into it naturally for THC molecules, which is why it's so quick to impact your brain. And they're trying to find out why. Why do we naturally have receptors for that particular molecule? which is the trick to any sort of medicine and its effectiveness, having it attached, particularly mental health types of medicines, to receptors. So it'll be very interesting 5 years from now to see where the medical research goes, where the social impacts are. It's still anecdotal in Washington, Colorado, Oregon, and it's just going to take some time.
And when it comes to the enforcement issue, again, I guess if they're talking about a continuing problem even with decriminalization, if it becomes easier now for police to just stop you, they don't have to go through as much paperwork, is that likely to increase the likelihood of some of the others who are likely to be harassed all the time by the police? Is that likely to increase that? It's too easy?
You're treading on a couple of different issues, and I'll let Tom jump in on some. But we were talking before that there's, in Rhode Island, I think, did you mention already that the police are not allowed just to search you or your car or whatever just based on the smell of marijuana, because you could have it for legal purposes?
You could, yes.
And so the likelihood of that changing how people are treated, I think you really have to look at it on what causes that treatment to be disparate anyway.
Right.
I
Police
guess
officers still have to have a reasonable suspicion of some sort of criminal activity. It doesn't really matter what's inside the car and what's impacting the driver. You have to have some facts in order to stop the vehicle to begin with. The question then becomes, where does the domino effect go from there? Once the car is open, once the smell is there, was there justification for the marijuana smell within the car, so on and so forth. So from an enforcement standpoint, they still have their rules to follow.
I guess one of the examples that I had followed up on was something they are concerned about calling the widening net. So maybe your taillight isn't working, so I'll stop you. And then I see that there's a joint in the car, or half a joint. It's not even lighted, but it's in public view, and even though it's not a felony, I can still give you a little trouble and bring you down to jail and have you processed or whatever. So that was the suspicion, how far that can go, because if a policeman stops you for any infraction or what they think might be an infraction, even speeding, and they see that there's public view of that
That happens
material.
with any search and with any illegal contraband that a person may have in their vehicle. The question is, do they try to tie it into erratic operation of the vehicle? Do you have legal authority to have it in your car to begin with? What's the quantity? Does it exceed the 1 ounce? You may end up getting arrested. There may be a police report filed. There may be charges filed, and it's up to you and your attorney to push back at the right point in time and try to say what in fact happened was legal under the circumstances.
Well, we certainly have covered a lot of topics here, and although there is the legal issue, there are more complications. Stay tuned. We hope that this has been helpful to you. Stay tuned to the Legal and Law Matters, because it matters to you.